This is BBC News. I'm Katrina Perry, live in Washington.
And I'm Matthew Emery-Waller here in London.
Joe Biden will speak from the White House in the next few moments. His first comments on camera since Donald Trump's election win. Joe Biden will speak from the White House in the next few moments. Donald Trump begins selecting his new cabinet after his stunning election win. Speculation the world's richest man, Elon Musk, may have a role.
Let's meet in Hungary to discuss security, the Washington result dominating conversations. What will an incoming Trump presidency mean in the key policy areas like Ukraine? One other headline, the Australian government is planning to introduce new laws banning children under 16 from social media. Hello and welcome to BBC News. Let's go straight to the US, where President Biden is due to give his first comments on camera since Tuesday's election defeat. We haven't got the pictures from the Rose Garden yet, but let's go to Katrina Perry. She's there live for us in Washington. And Katrina, when it comes, it is going to be quite a moment, isn't it?
Indeed it is, Matthew. This is the first time we'll have heard from President Joe Biden since the election results, since that emphatic victory for Donald Trump, when voters in America rejected what the Democratic Party was offering them and opted instead for the Republican Party and for Donald Trump. We heard so much negative rhetoric during this campaign from President Biden himself, at times making very unpleasant, you might say, remarks about Donald Trump and how serious he viewed the threat to America in another Donald Trump presidency. The voters have said otherwise, and this will be President Joe Biden's time to address the voters of America, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and those who haven't voted at all, and to attempt to hand over the power. There's a concept here in the US, the peaceful transition of power, the peaceful transfer of power, and it's supposed to be seamless, is the plan anyway. Of course, that's not always how it works in reality, where one administration ends, that ends at a minute to midday on the 20th of January, and the new administration begins at midday on the 20th of January every 4 years, and it's supposed to be seamless. Of course, that's not what we saw in 2020 when President Donald Trump wasn't accepting the results of the election. He chose not to attend the inauguration ceremony, instead left Washington, D.C. by helicopter and then his jet to go to Florida rather than attend the inauguration of President Joe Biden. So I think it's safe to say there's no love lost between these two individuals, but President Biden will be attempting something of a reset in these remarks that he will make to the nation. They'll be carried live, obviously, here on the BBC, but also on all of the US networks, because this is a major speech to the people of America. It is, as Stephanie Murphy, our panelist, our former Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, was explaining earlier, tradition. It's the norm for a president to do something like this, and Stephanie is still with us. Stephanie, how hard is this going to be for President Biden on a personal note, given what we've heard from him about Donald Trump over the course of this campaign?
I think it's got to be a very bitter moment for him, not just because he has to give a speech congratulating the former president for winning this election, but also because of his role in this campaign and how he might see what happened. I think Joe Biden is a very proud man, and he sees himself in ways that may not align with the way the American people saw him. And so he probably is still wondering why he's not the candidate. And he probably believes that he could have won. And so, I like you said, these two candidates have a very long history. I think this might be a very bittersweet moment for a lot of reasons, because I do think Joe Biden cares about this country and has genuine concerns about the direction that it will go in under a Trump 2.0 administration. But there's also a personal element of this that it underlies all of the professional speech that I'm sure he will be giving.
Do you think there'll be elements of Joe Biden's legacy that maybe he hasn't managed to get over the final finish line, and he'll be concerned about that? I mean, he is still in office for 2.5 months, but it's very difficult now that his policies and his party's policies have been so emphatically rejected by the American people.
Yeah, one area that I think might be interesting to see is that he sees himself as a foreign policy expert. He's spent decades in Washington with a keen focus on that. And so I wonder whether or not in this lame duck he tries to push for some sort of resolution on some of the foreign policy issues that have challenged his administration and were part of the reason why the American people voted for somebody they saw to be strong on foreign policy issues. So that would be something to watch for. I think there are going to be things as every candidate, as every politician, as they leave, they look for things that are their legacy, and how they tie that up and ensure that that happens in the waning days remains to be seen. But I imagine that he's looking for ways to cement some of his legacy here.
And what does this all mean for Kamala Harris, Stephanie, do you think? I mean, she is also still vice president for another 2.5 months. So what will she do in that time?
Well, I think both Biden and Harris will continue to serve this country. A big part of why we have this period of time between when there's an election and when the actual transition happens is to ensure that there's continuity of government. We live in a dangerous world. There are a lot of things that are going on, both domestically and abroad, that requires leadership at the top, and we also require the ability to prepare the incoming administration to take over the duties so that it is a seamless transition, because that's in the best interest of the American people. And so I imagine she will continue her duties as the vice president, as Biden will continue his duties as president.
Do you expect that Kamala Harris will try and maintain somewhat of a public political profile once her term in office comes to an end? I mean, maybe it's too early for her to think about this, but whether she intends to maybe seek the nomination again in another 4 years.
What I've discovered about politicians in Washington is that there's endless ambition, and very seldomly do people hand over power, nor do they see the limits of what their career path might be. 4 years is a long time in politics, and she's a young woman relative to our typical age of politicians here in the United States. And so I imagine that there will be some consideration as how to remake herself and continue to be a voice in the Democratic Party. After all, she ran unsuccessfully in the 19 Democratic primary and found herself, surprisingly, the nominee for this coming out of this election cycle. So, who knows what might happen? And I think politicians always leave their options open.
And just looking ahead, Stephanie, to the new administration, once Donald Trump takes residence here in the White House behind me, he will, of course, have the benefit of having a Republican-led Senate and perhaps the House as well, seats still being counted there. How empowering is that for Donald Trump and for his legislative agenda, his wish list?
Well, I've been watching a lot of his surrogates who keep saying that this is a mandate because he won the popular vote as well as the Electoral College vote. But I would caution the administration in seeing a narrowly won race as a mandate. I think one of the big mistakes Biden made was he saw his popular vote win and electoral vote win, although narrow, as a mandate, and he governed not as the moderate that he ran as, but rather as a progressive. And 4 years later, the American people rejected that. I think Trump has an opportunity here to actually address some of the issues that the American people did vote for him for, and I think primarily that's the economy. Although his preliminary economic policies look like they might work against his campaign promises. His primary economic policy focuses around a consumer tax on the American people through the form of a tariff, as well as some significant immigration reform, deportation, which would significantly impact the workforce here in the United States. Economists have said that both of these policies have significant inflationary outcomes. And I think if that's what happens in the early days of his administration, it's going to be a very difficult go for him with the American people who voted for a specific result and may be disappointed with what they actually get.
Okay, stay with us, Sarah Stephanie. We also have Matt Terrell with us. He's a Republican strategist and former chief of staff to Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Matt, we're just talking there about Donald Trump and the mandate, or maybe not mandate, that he has from the American people. With that emphatic victory, with control of the Senate, with possibly control of the House as well. What does that mean for his policies and what he's going to hope to do in his administration?
Well, it means he has a mandate. It means that he's going to be able to come in and be able to pass and push forward the policies that he had campaigned on, namely on border security, namely on the issues of inflation and the economy, but also picking up where he was, left off during the first term of his presidency. For example, the tax cuts that he implemented in 2017, those are up. So having a Republican Congress will allow him to extend those and continue to extend policies that he had built on in his first term. But I think regardless of what we see here in Washington in terms of the makeup of political parties, it is going to be important for President Trump to unite the country. I think, to build on his political mandate and to build on the vote that he had with the popular vote and winning the Electoral College, working to unite the country will be key. And I think focusing on the policies that all Americans care about, inflation, border security, safety, that's what he should be focused in on. But expect him to be focused in on key things that he had built on and implemented during his first term and continuing those, such as those tax cuts that are up. That's going to be critical to have that Republican Congress. Obviously, it looks like you'll certainly have that with the win in the Senate. The House is looking very promising. The House of Representatives to stay in the Republican column. We'll see how that unfolds in the House races here. But he'll have a mandate, and that's going to be critical for him, not just to get through policies, but key confirmations. Right now, this is the transition period for the president-elect and his team. And a big part of that is going to be, confirmations for cabinet posts and other key positions that will matter. In addition to that, thinking through upcoming potential Supreme Court nominations, there is the potential for that, of course, over the next few years. Obviously, that's a key thing that presidents look for when those opportunities do arise, if, in fact, justices step off the bench. So, look, those are all things that a Republican makeup in Congress will help the president drive as he implements his policies over the next years.
And Matt, as we're speaking here, we're awaiting this address from President Joe Biden in the Rose Garden here at the White House, his first time to speak in public since Donald Trump was declared to be the next president of this country, the 47th president. And we've heard from the White House that Joe Biden is going to try and unify the country and speak about the importance of that peaceful transfer of power. That's not what we saw, of course, from Donald Trump in 2020. Do you think he'll have changed his approach? Joe Biden has invited him to come to the White House in the next few days. Do you think he'll try and strike a conciliatory tone between these two men, even though such heated rhetoric has been exchanged between them?
Well, we'll see. President Trump has a style and approach to campaigning. He has a style and approach to governing. Here's what I think, and this is just my opinion. Look, I think President Trump has obviously been given a second chance here. All of us in life are given second chances, but this is a pretty big second chance to become president once again. So look, the reality is I think he's going to waste no time in terms of getting his policies in order and getting the right people, in his view, in place for key positions. But in terms of unity and unifying the country, I do expect that he will recognize that that's going to be important to do. But again, I think for him right now, having not just the Electoral College, but the support of the popular vote, that to him, I think, signals that many of the things he was talking about, particularly on the key policies that Americans care about, inflation, the economy, and border security, that resonated with the majority of Americans. And also what we're seeing right now is that the majority of Americans think that the country is going the wrong direction. The majority of Americans are unified in recognizing that over 70% of Americans think that this country is on the wrong course. So right now, the country, I think, is the majority behind him. We saw that obviously in the election. That's something I think he can continue to build on. But I think focusing on policies that unite all Americans will be key out of the gate, and I expect that he'll do that.
Okay, well, we will wait to see what we hear from Joe Biden and what we hear from Donald Trump in the coming days. Matt Terrell, Republican strategist and former Chief of Staff to Senator Marco Rubio, and Stephanie Murphy, former Democratic Congresswoman from Florida. Thanks for being with us. We'll speak to you a little bit later on. Woo, about to fall off my perch here on the rooftop. We are awaiting that speech. I didn't fall, I'm safe, don't worry. We're awaiting that speech in the Rose Garden there from Joe Biden. It's outdoors, I can tell you, just a little quick weather forecast. It's 25 degrees Celsius here in this mid-morning sunshine here in Washington, D.C. in November. So that's why they've selected the Rose Garden. It's a beautiful, not quite winter's day at that temperature, but it's lovely here. We'll talk to you in a moment.
Katrina, as a short person, I know the perils of standing on those boxes, so thanks very much for now. I'll be back with you in a little while. I want to show you the live picture from the White House because we've got that picture now that has become established, which gives you a sense that it is pretty close. We were told 3 or 4 minutes ago it was 10 minutes away, so you can see still a little flurry of activity as they get everything in place. So as soon as that starts, we're live back at the White House to hear from Joe Biden. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. You're watching BBC News. Let me take you straight back to the White House, show you the live pictures. We're not that far away from seeing Joe Biden, those first public comments on camera. All the press, you saw them established. The camera has now moved in, and in the next little while we'll see that door open and we'll see the US president. I think it's still about 5 minutes away, which gives me a chance to bring in my colleague Lewis Vaughan-Jones, because for the last couple of days he's been analysing Donald Trump's path to the White House and crucially looking at the key groups the Republicans were able to attract this time around. Lewis, back to you.
Matthew, thank you very much. Yes, we're going to take a look at some of those key demographics, black voters, Latino, Hispanic voters. Let's start with those and the increase in support for Donald Trump there. Let's take a look. We're going to start in Texas, right down on the border. A remarkable story here. This is Starr County. Trump victory there, 57.7%. Pretty convincing. But even more remarkable when you look at last time. This was 2020. Biden won it convincingly. And then, look at this, 2016, Clinton, 79%. So that shift away, absolutely huge. And now this time, if you just watch here, blue, remember, is Democrat down here. Towards the border. Just watch that. That's 2020. The red creeps for Republicans. And now Republican Donald Trump. But you could say, OK, well, that's Texas. That's Trump anyway. Didn't influence particularly the outcome of the election. So let's go to a swing state, one of those ones that was up for grab. Let's go to Pennsylvania. We'll see here, fairly typical picture, the red of Republican Donald Trump, rural areas. You see these huge numbers, 80% in these smaller counties, 75% up there. And then the blue of the Democrats around the big cities. So part of the challenge for Kamala Harris was to, yes, get the vote out there, but also around these suburbs areas. Now, if you look at some of these areas here and here, Trump won in both. Well, those areas had strong Latino populations. They didn't come out in enough numbers for Kamala Harris. Donald Trump took them, and Kamala Harris wasn't able to counteract all this support that Donald Trump had in these areas. So let's take a look at those urban areas. Philadelphia here, concentration of Democrat voters, higher number of black voters too. And look, Harris, 78%, that looks pretty convincing. But it's actually the first time Democrats have fallen below 80% there. Let's look at 2020. Biden got 81%. 2016, Clinton on 82%. So actually, Harris not performing as she needed to win. Pittsburgh, same story over here, another urban area. Let's not look at the percentages this time. Look at the absolute number, 419,000 votes there for Kamala Harris this time. Look at 2020. Biden got 430,000. So the overall number of votes falling there under Kamala Harris, that was not enough to counteract these largely white working class areas that Trump in these rural areas managed to maintain that lead. Why does all that matter? Well, let's just zoom out. Because if you go back to the 2020 election, these were blue for Democrats. Joe Biden won these 3 states here. They turned red because of small gains from Donald Trump in those rural areas and Kamala Harris not being able to make up the ground in those urban areas and in those demographic groups. And that led, therefore, to Donald Trump taking the presidency. Matthew.
Lewis, thanks very much. Fascinating when you see it broken down like that. Of course, everyone, the American networks, everyone else debating just how Donald Trump managed to win this election so convincingly in the end and why Kamala Harris failed to attract enough support. Well, whilst the pundits have been giving their opinions, we've been finding out what voters thought. We asked Americans visiting Washington from all the other states.
I think that there's this average American that feels abandoned by the glamour, by, Beyonce performing at rallies and things like that. Like, that's not what I care about. Like, I care about, how can I afford a home one day? Or how can I, afford to have children one day?
Folks never really got an understanding of what was different about Harris versus Biden.
The Democratic Party is very focused on a lot of issues that seem to be for upper class, like transgender issues, abortion.
She was a woman of color, and I think that scares a lot of people. They don't like to, unfortunately, they don't like the idea of a woman being in charge.
A lot of the things she wanted to change, people thought they were broken because of her vice presidency and Biden's presidency to begin with.
Her message, there was really nothing there.
I think a lot of people were trying to see if they can, know her, but there was not enough time for people to actually know who she really was.
Trump won the election because I think of what a lot of Americans are looking for to fix the United States is the economy.
We have so much division in the country, and people weren't, I think, ready to choose a woman for president, especially a woman of color.
Trump won because people had the opportunity to see what happened the last 4 years and then what happened when Trump was president.
Trump won, probably in part because Joe Biden delayed his decision too long.
I believe Trump won mainly because the economy is in shambles right now.
It looks more like the economy was a major priority, and that's why I think he won.
At the end of the day, someone just wants to focus on having enough money to pay their bills, get groceries. It's as simple as that.
Really interesting hearing the views of just a handful of voters there. A quick pointer, because here at 15:30 GMT we'll be answering some of your questions on the outcome of this election, some of the key issues facing Donald Trump's incoming team when they take office, the likes of migration, the state of the US economy and healthcare, including the issue of abortion. So do get in touch. There is still time to send in your question, hashtag BBC Your Questions, or send us an email to yourquestions@bbc.co.uk. Well, that's an hour ahead. Let's get back to what is happening at the White House. You see the door firmly shut still, but the other shot from the Rose Garden is showing just about all of the journalists taking their place. Let me just show you the other picture in a second or two, but the last few people just taking their seats. So I don't think we're that far away from hearing from Joe Biden. There, the door opens, and there is the President of the United States, Joe Biden, emerging. These will be the first comments on camera to the nation after Tuesday's devastating defeat for the Democrats. Let's put the microphones up.
Thank you. Please. Thank you. Good to see this cabinet and staff together here. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. please. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It's good to see you all. Particularly good to see my granddaughter sitting in the front row here. Hi, Finn. How are you, honey? For over 200 years, America has carried on the greatest experiment in self-government in the history of the world. And that's not hyperbole, that's a fact. We're the people. The people vote and choose their own leaders, and they do it peacefully. And we're in a democracy. The will of the people always prevails. Yesterday, I spoke with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory. And I assured him that I'd direct my entire administration to work with his team to ensure a peaceful and orderly transition. That's what the American people deserve. Yesterday, I also spoke with Vice President Harris. She's been a partner and a public servant. She ran an inspiring campaign, and everyone got to see something that I learned early on to respect so much, her character. She has a backbone like a ramrod. She has great character, true character. She gave her whole heart and effort, and she and her entire team should be proud of the campaign they ran. You know, the struggle for the soul of America, since our very founding, has always been an ongoing debate and still vital today. I know for some people, it's a time for victory, to state the obvious. For others, it's a time of loss. Campaigns are contests of competing visions. The country chooses one or the other. We accept the choice the country made. I've said many times, you can't love your country only when you win. You can't love your neighbor only when you agree. Something I hope we can do, no matter who you voted for, is see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. Bring down the temperature. I also hope we can lay to rest the question about the integrity of the American electoral system. It is honest, it is fair, and it is transparent. And it can be trusted, win or lose. I also hope we can restore the respect for all our election workers who busted their necks and took risks at the outset. We should thank them. Thank them for staffing voting sites, counting the votes, protecting the very integrity of the election. Many of them are volunteers who do it simply out of love for their country. And as they did their duty as citizens, I will do my duty as president. I'll fulfill my oath, and I will honor the Constitution. On January 20th, we'll have a peaceful transfer of power here in America. To all our incredible staff, supporters, cabinet members, all the people who've been hanging out with me for the last 40 years, God love you, as my mother would say, thank you so much. You put so much into the past 4 years. I know it's a difficult time. You're hurting. I hear you and I see you. But don't forget all that we accomplished. It's been a historic presidency. Not because I'm president, because what we've done, what you've done. A presidency for all Americans. Much of the work we've done is already being felt by the American people, but the vast majority of it will not be felt over the next 10 years. We have legislation we passed that's just only now just really kicking in. We're going to see over $1 trillion worth of infrastructure work done, changing people's lives in rural communities and communities that are in real difficulty because it takes time to get it done. And so much more it's going to take time, but it's there. The road ahead is clear, assuming we sustain it. There's so much we can get done and will get done based on the way the legislation was passed. And it's truly historic. You know, we're leaving behind the strongest economy in the world. I know people are still hurting, but things are changing rapidly. Together, we've changed America for the better. Now we have 74 days to finish the term, our term. Let's make every day count. That's the responsibility we have to the American people. Look, folks, you all know it in your lives. Setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable. Setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable. We all get knocked down, but the measure of our character, as my dad would say, is how quickly we get back up. Remember, a defeat does not mean we are defeated. We lost this battle. The America of your dreams is calling for you to get back up. That's the story of America for over 240 years and counting. It's a story for all of us, not just some of us. The American experiment endures. We're going to be okay, but we need to stay engaged. We need to keep going. And above all, we need to keep the faith. I'm so proud to have worked with all of you. I really mean it. I sincerely mean it. God bless you all. God bless America. And may God protect our troops. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, applause for Joe Biden as he concludes 3 or 4 minutes of those first comments after Tuesday's significant, stunning defeat for the Democrats. He returns into the White House. He started and addressed most of those comments about the transition of power. He said that people had voted and chosen, and the transfer of power would happen peacefully. He said yesterday he'd spoken to Donald Trump and congratulated him on the victory. As you see, all of those who are in the audience just begin to drift away. He said, I promised Donald Trump there would be a peaceful and orderly transition of power. He then paid tribute to Kamala Harris. He said she had true character and she should be proud with the rest of her team for the election campaign that she carried out. And he then had a wider message to all those American citizens watching. He said, you can't lose your neighbour when you only agree, or love your neighbour rather, when you only agree. You've got to see each other as fellow Americans. He then spent time to emphasise that the electoral system in America was fair, was trusted, given, of course, everything that had happened over the last 4 years, and again returned to talking about the peaceful transfer of power. He said setbacks were unavoidable, but giving up was deplorable. He said that a couple of times. He said, we have lost this battle, but the America of your dreams needs you to get back up. So fascinating there in terms of what Joe Biden said. We were talking to Katrina before and she was making the point and anticipating so much of that, concentrating really on how that transition happens between the Democrats and the incoming Trump administration in January, given everything we saw 4 years ago, and treading very carefully around all of those multiple issues that the Democrat Party will have to come back to address why they actually lost this election so convincingly. Let's go back to Katrina. She was watching to all of that, and in a sense you had predicted much of the content there, Katrina, but it was fascinating hearing the president absolutely focus on that key message of transfers of power have to happen peacefully, orderly.
Indeed, this was a very emotional Joe Biden, actually, Matthew, that I think we saw there. He spoke, as you say, about that peaceful transition of power. He pledged to put the full force of his administration at the disposal of President-elect Donald Trump, so there could be that smooth transition of power. I spotted in the crowd there several members of his cabinet. The Agriculture Secretary, Tom Vilsack, was there. The Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, was there. Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, was there. Secretary Mayorkas for Homeland Security. and the Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona. They're just the ones I spotted. There may have been plenty more there, but it's that team, that Joe Biden team now, that will work with Donald Trump's transition team to hand over power, as Joe Biden said repeatedly there, peacefully and for America. Interesting, Joe Biden ended the speech with his trademark slogan, "Keep the faith." That's something that he speaks about often, is what his own mother used to say to him when he had tough times growing up, going out the door. His mother would say, "Keep the faith, Joey." So he tells that story a lot. So I think it's really interesting that he had that right at the end of the speech. You could see that, you know, it was a tough moment for him. He spoke about the legacy. He made a point of highlighting how well the American economy is, but saying he appreciated that it didn't feel that way for very many people. He said the legislation that had been enacted was there and it wouldn't go away, but that people would see the benefits of some of that legislation over the next 10 years. And of course, that's the way with economic policies in particular, isn't it? The way the cycles work, it can take a while for the impact of them to trickle down to people, and his acknowledgement there that the American people are hurting, they are struggling. It is very expensive to live in this country at the moment. And he also spoke, as you pointed out there, of the need for Americans to unite. He said you can't love your country only when you win. You know, that we've been defeated, but we are not defeated. Lots of lines like that, little slogans, which we might see turning up as hashtags and on T-shirts now from some of his supporters. And he made the point, he's still in office for 74 more days. And listening to him there, he doesn't intend to sit around doing nothing for those 74 days. In addition to working with the Trump administration, he said he still has work to do.
Yes, Katrina, we'll return to exactly that final thought in a moment or two with you. But I want to cross to Anna Foster, because she was there in the Rose Garden. She's emerged now. And Anna, let me bring you into the conversation, because what was that like, seeing that, witnessing that at close quarters?
I think what was particularly interesting, Matthew, and listening to what Katrina was saying there as well, this was an address to the nation, of course. It was packed with cameras, with journalists. It was broadcast on all the TV channels here in the US. But what was actually in front of him and the people who he was talking to were the members of his administration, the staff that he's worked with. And a lot of it felt like he was really focusing directly on them. And even in his tone of voice, when he was sort of being very conciliatory, it's almost like being, a kind of kindly uncle saying, don't give up, it's okay, these things happen. And it felt in many ways like he was almost not talking to those cameras that were lined up in front of him, but to those people on the chairs at the front. And he was saying about what they'd done, their record in the White House. It almost felt like a pep talk to them directly. And then of course inevitably you have the media behind, picking up on every word. I'm sure you noticed at the start of that speech, the warm applause. There was some whooping and cheering, and he had to wait a couple of moments before he actually started speaking at the podium there. And then at the end, similarly, he waited for the applause. Lots of shouted questions from the assembled media, lots of people asking him. I don't think he was ever going to take questions, to be honest. I think that was always going to be, a speech which was designed, I think, very much for him, for his supporters. Of course, he didn't take this moment, and I don't think he ever would have done. He didn't take the moment to sort of attack his rivals, to attack Donald Trump, what he brought to the campaign, the points of difference which they had, very clearly at times. But it was interesting, I think, that he did reflect on the damage that had been done to the integrity of the American electoral process, or certainly to the perception of that integrity. He really made a point. More than once he talked about the peaceful transition of power after what happened, of course, at the US Capitol here in Washington. And he talked as well about, the fact that this restored faith, proved that the electoral system was fit for purpose and had delivered this result.
Yes, and exactly as you're saying, he rather sidestepped, as we anticipated, any of those questions about why they lost. He knows that, and all those postmortems will be done away from the cameras with the rest of the Democratic top team. But that central message, you were touching on it, and another of the lines that he said, we need in America to bring down the temperature of our politics.
He did, and a line like that on a day like today, Washington is experiencing this unseasonable heat wave. People really sort of sweating in the White House gardens as the sun beats down, and I mean, he knows that speech is important, and it marks in many ways, Matthew, a close to this phase of the electoral campaign. Yesterday we waited to hear from Kamala Harris. Today we waited to hear from him, and in a way that sort of puts a full stop on it for now. That's why I sort of say to this phase of the campaign. Obviously the transition team will start moving in. Donald Trump will start appointing the people that he wants to work with, and then the next big occasion here will be the inauguration on the 20th of January. He did talk about the last few days of the presidency. You know, he said, let's do what we can. Let's make the most of it, the last 74 days or so. I mean, in reality, there's not a great deal he can do, because the way that things work here is once you have a president-elect, you know, it is not really the done thing for the current president to make any really big changes. You know, it's more about steadying the ship and keeping things going in that time. But of course, one of the big elements of steadying the ship is making a conciliatory speech like that to the nation, you know, urging his supporters, urging Democrats, you know, up and down America to keep the faith and keep strong. But also, as you say, as you identify quite rightly there, Matthew, not taking it as a moment to attack Donald Trump, what he stood for, his supporters, you know, knowing that this is a moment to cool the temperature, to bring people back together, because that is much needed after this election campaign.
Anna, thanks so much. Let's go back to Katrina. Katrina, the president there determined that he won't become a lame duck president, but as Anna was saying, it is really limited what he can actually achieve in these final couple of weeks.
It is to a point. You know, it's been limited what he can achieve for these months because the Democrats have not had control of both houses of power in Congress, and that is really where the power lies. But the president has a lot of power when it comes to foreign policy. We see two very extreme conflicts taking place, particularly in the Middle East, where the US has such a role in terms of negotiations and so on, and they will have to stay active on that. They can't sort of do nothing in that field for the next 2.5 months. So he will be still engaged in that. And we know, of course, the personal connection that Joe Biden has to Israel and has to the situation in the Middle East. So I don't expect him to sit back on that issue. He will, though, have to consult with President-elect Donald Trump if there were to be any major decisions. It is protocol that you are consulting. Donald Trump now will start getting national security briefings, and he'll be looped in on what to expect, because obviously you can't have a situation where a president starts on the 20th of January and they have a big book of information to try and read and take decisions on immediately. So Donald Trump will already be receiving those briefings as we speak. Joe Biden could take executive actions if he wanted to. We saw Donald Trump do that in the last weeks of his administration. Donald Trump, as we know, changed the playbook for much of American politics between how to campaign and also how to govern. But I want to bring in now former Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy from Florida. Stephanie, listening there to Joe Biden, the head of your party, what did you take from that speech? What did it mean for you?
Well, it was a dignified speech that is befitting of somebody who holds the office of the president. And he was speaking to his staff as well as to all the cameras that were behind there. But the messages that he sent to his staff, thanking them for all the hard work that they did. Working in the White House is incredibly difficult. The hours are long, and the people who work there for him were incredibly impassioned about what they were working on. And I thought it was interesting that he acknowledged that all of their hard work isn't yet felt by the American people. It might not be felt by the American people for some time. And that might be part of why the Democrats lost this election, is that while they passed a lot of laws that sought to improve life in America, investments in infrastructure, building out our semiconductor industry, a lot of those things take time, and perhaps they didn't do enough selling of what it was that they were doing. And in the absence of being able to feel that, the American people rejected the Democratic Party in this election. But, you know, I also thought he harked back to some lines that are classic for him. You know, he talked about the struggle for the soul of America. And encouraging people to, you know, not be discouraged by the outcome, because this is a situation where there are multiple games. There'll be another round. There'll be another opportunity, and that American voices can continue to be heard throughout, no matter who is in the White House. So I thought overall it was what one would expect of him, of a traditional politician, a traditional president in this moment when so many of in his party are so deeply disappointed with the outcome of Tuesday's election.
And Stephanie, he spoke as well about the integrity in this past election, in the counting of votes and so on. He used words honest, fair, transparent, and the result can be trusted. How important was it for him to make those kind of remarks, given what we'd seen in the run-up to polling day on Tuesday, particularly what we'd heard from the president-elect himself casting doubt about how the election was run? Do those comments from Joe Biden seek to sort of end all of that debate that the election was run properly and the result can be trusted?
It's amazing how all of the concerns that the Trump campaign had about the election went away when he won. But I think it is important for the sitting president and powerful people in this country who are in the know regarding our politics to reassure the American people that our election system is secure. It has been secure. It was secure in 2020, and it continues to improve. And there has not been any evidence that the election system in this country has had anything wrong with it. And but he needed to say that because it has been years of very damaging attacks on the system and on the individual people who volunteer to work at the polls. You look back at the poll workers in Georgia who were attacked and their lives changed significantly because many people were lied to and told that these two Georgia election voters had engaged in some sort of untoward activity in the 2020 election, and it caused death threats and really upended their lives. And the courts in the end found it in their favor, found it that they were victims of misinformation. But, you know, they say that a lie travels around the world before the truth gets a moment to get its pants on and get out of bed. So I do think at every opportunity, people who are in power need to reaffirm the truth about our election system and that there's nothing wrong with it. Because we need, in a democracy, for the American people to have faith in that system.
And in fact, Joe Biden gave a shout out to the poll workers in his speech there, didn't he? Telling Americans to say thank you to the poll workers and to make sure to respect them as well. As you say, there was somewhat of a rallying cry, a call to arms for the next set of elections here, because as we know, the way things work in America, different to the way they work on the other side of the Atlantic. There's a very, very long run into election campaigns here. And he said at one point, setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable.
Yeah, I think there's still a vision for America that in this particular election, it wasn't over half, but there's still a significant number of Americans who want to see something different out of their government, and they want to see certain rights protected, like reproductive rights. They want to see you know, an America that is inclusive. And so I think, you know, this is part of the American political tradition, is that, you know, you campaign your heart out and then there's some amount of governing for a short period of time and then the campaigns ramp right back up again. And here we are with 2 years to the next major election, which are the midterms. And I think, you know, as a party you know, President Biden wants to see his party continue to fight for the values that Democrats stand for. I do think that there needs to be a reevaluation of how they talk about those values and how they reach voters, because clearly this election was resoundingly a message to the Democratic Party that they aren't resonating right now with the American people at a level that would enable them to hold power. And so my hope, though, is that we move past this campaign, engage in governing for, you know, and then when the next election comes around, get ready to battle on ideas again.
All right. Okay. Stephanie Murphy, former Democratic Congresswoman from Florida. Thanks for joining us. Back over to you in studio, Matthew.
Katrina, thanks very much. But I want to just show to our viewers, Vladimir Putin has just started speaking. So there are the pictures. Let's put the sound up and hear from the Russian president for the next few moments.
Rule of people with a certain abstract freedom, and for that sake, democratic procedures, elections, majority and freedom of speech and media objectivity can be sacrificed. The threat is the imposal and becoming of ideologies totalitarian in their essence a norm. And that's what we see in the Western liberalism that has degenerated into, I believe, in extreme intolerance and aggression towards any alternative, towards any sovereign and independent thought. And today, it justifies neo-Nazism, terrorism, racism, and even mass genocide of civilian population. In the end, that's international conflicts and clashes that might bring about mutual destruction, because the weapons capable of doing that already exists, and it's constantly being improved. It acquires new forms as the technologies develop, and the club of the countries that possess such weapons is becoming wider, and no one can guarantee that in case of avalanche-like increase in threats and final deterioration of legal and moral norms, it would not be used. I have already said that we've come to a dangerous line, and calls of the West to deliver strategic defeat to Russia, a country with the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons, shows extreme adventurism of the Western politicians, at least some of them. Such blind faith in their own impunity and exceptionalism might turn to a global tragedy. At the same time, the previous hegemons used to ruling the world back from colonial times learn, and more often to their surprise, that no one is listening to them. The attempts to maintain the power slipping away through force only leads to overall instability and greater tensions, to casualties and destruction. But the result that they're trying to achieve, to maintain their absolute power, such attempts do not ensure success, because the course of history cannot be stopped. Instead of becoming aware of futility of their strive, the objective nature of changes, some of the Western elites are prepared to do everything not to allow for emergence of new international system in line with the interests of the world majority. The policy of the US and their allies in the past years is more and more prominent through the principle, if I can't have it, no one will. If you're not with us, you're against us. Well, this formula is very dangerous, because here and in many countries of the world, there is such a saying that you reap what you sow. The chaos and systemic crisis is already in full swing in those countries that are trying to conduct such a policy. The claims to being exceptional, to being liberal and globalist messiahs, to ideological and military and political monopoly, are depleting those countries more and more that are trying to conduct this policy and pushing the world towards deterioration. It comes in direct contradiction with the true interests of the nations of the US and European countries. I'm sure that sooner or later the West will understand that, because the foundation of its former great achievements was always the pragmatic and sober approach, based on very harsh and at times cynical but rational evaluation of what's happening in their own capacities. And here I'd like to highlight once again, unlike our opponents, Russia does not perceive the Western civilization as an enemy. It does not raise the question, us or them. Who's not with us, he's against us. We never say that. We don't want to pontificate to anyone. We don't want to impose our worldview on anyone. Our position is an open one, and it's the following. The West has accumulated, indeed, tremendous human, intellectual, cultural, and material resources, thanks to which it can successfully develop, remaining one of the crucial elements of the world system. But it is precisely one of, together with other actively developing countries and states and groups of countries, the notion of hegemony in the new international sphere is off the table. And when Washington and other Western capitals become aware of that and recognize this cold, hard fact, then the process of building of the global system in line with the challenges of the future will finally enter the phase of true constructive building. I hope to God that it will happen as soon as possible. It is in common interests, also in the interest and first and foremost in the interest of the West. As of now, everyone who is interested in the creation of a just and viable world have to spend too much effort on overcoming the destructive actions of the West, clinging to their own monopoly. It's apparent that it's happening, and everyone can see that. In the West, in the East, in the South, and everywhere. They're trying to keep their power and monopoly. These are apparent things. These efforts could have been directed with much greater use and result to solving common problems that indeed concern everyone. Demographic problems, social inequality, climate change, food security, healthcare, new technologies. That's what we could think about it. What we all truly need to work on. Today, I will allow myself several philosophical asides, since this is a discussion club. Then I hope that will follow in the vein of the discussions that were happening here before. I have already said that the world is changing drastically and...
Well, Vladimir Putin talking about Russia's view. He said Russia doesn't view the West as us against them, and said our position is an open one. A little earlier in the afternoon, the Kremlin spokesman saying if the new US administration is going to look for peace rather than war, it will be better. We'll continue to monitor that speech. We'll also be live back in Washington, because we just heard in the last half hour from Joe Biden. So we're back live in Washington here on the programme in a moment or two. Don't go away.